So, a few weeks ago, I had a chat with a couple people regarding the walkaway movement. And one of the guests that I had was kind of a person I'd only become acquainted with recently, Ricardo. And he expressed some pretty um, adamant positions about abortion, which were beyond really what my opinion. But we had a difference of opinion where I said I don't believe that the government should be funding the procedure at all. I think it's almost akin to a cosmetic procedure in many cases. Okay, it's elective surgery, and I think elective surgery should not necessarily be covered under the Medicare, Medicaid, or any of the other state-supported health insurance programs that we have. I don't believe in federal funding of any of these clinics that do perform abortions, Planned Parenthood being the most famous one. And he said that my position was not really enough. He said that your regardless of whatever the reason, abortion is unethical. Okay, and I think with that, I did have a philosophical disagreement with him because I do think that in the rare cases when the mother's life is in danger, I think abortion should be on the table. In cases of rape, I think they should be discouraged from having an abortion. I think it should be discouraged, but I don't think it should be illegal. Okay, and if people want it to be some sort of, I've seen Styx Hexenhammer make the point that abortion should be, if you can either have an all or nothing position. He's completely pro-choice, and the friend of mine, Ricardo, happens to be extremely pro-life. So this is getting a lot of buzz now from the Journal of Medical Ethics in Britain. I think it's the British Medical Journal. It says afterbirth abortion, why should the baby live? And I actually saw Sargon of Akkad tweet this out. It says abortion is largely accepted even for reasons that do not have anything to do with the fetus health. By showing that one, both fetuses and newborns do not have the same moral status as actual persons, two, the fact that both are potential persons is morally irrelevant, and three, adoption is not always in the best interest of actual people. The authors argue that what we call afterbirth abortion, killing a newborn, should be permissible in all the cases where abortion is, including cases where the newborn is not disabled. So, what I think people should keep in mind here, okay, is that this is an academic journal. This isn't necessarily a call to campaign for legalizing afterbirth abortion. So I don't want to be a sensationalist here, but what it is essentially is kind of opening the door, because now people are going to be saying, is there an ethical foundation to killing a newborn child after birth? Okay, it's no longer this idea, well, it's my body, my choice. Now the so to speak person has been born, and they have these people are going to lay the foundation for saying, well, even in this case, this person could be considered not a person, and then we would be able to abort him or her. So they say severe abnormalities of the fetus and risks for the physical and or psychological health of the woman are often cited as valid reasons for abortion. Sometimes the two reasons are connected, such as when a woman claims that a disabled child would represent a risk to her mental health. However, having a child can itself be an unbearable burden for the psychological health of the woman or for her already existing children, regardless of the condition of the fetus. This could happen in the case of a woman who loses her partner after she finds out that she is pregnant and therefore feels she will not be able to take care of the possible child by herself. So what's going on here is that you're seeing this journal essentially skew all of the interests to that of the parent, the mother. Okay, the fact is that yes, if a woman is distraught over the death of her partner, it would be the husband. It would be the husband. If we're really being honest here, it wouldn't just be. We're not talking about a woman losing. Well, I guess supposedly, if a gay woman is pregnant and she was artificially inseminated, a lesbian is artificially inseminated, and her wife, I guess, would be killed in a car accident. I guess you could make the same case. Uh, but I mean, I don't know why they have to deliberately use the word partner, if not for the fact that they're trying to be sensitive to everybody except for a newborn child. Ironically, newborn children don't have any right to have their case pleaded for. A serious philosophical problem arises when the same conditions that would have justified abortion become known after birth. In such cases, we need to assess facts in order to decide whether the same arguments that apply to killing a human fetus can also be consistently applied to killing a newborn human. Such an issue arises, for example, when an abnormality has not been detected during pregnancy or occurs during delivery. Perinatal asphyxia, for instance, may cause severe brain damage and result in severe mental and or physical impairments comparable with those for which a woman could request an abortion. So I believe that is when the fetus is being birthed, the infant is being birthed, and the umbilical cord becomes tied around the neck and restricts the flow of oxygen to the brain. That's what I remember that is. Okay, if I'm wrong, you guys can send. I'm not a medical expert. You can send me a comment or something. I won't take offense, even if you call me an asshole. Moreover, abnormalities are not always or cannot always be diagnosed through prenatal screening, even if they have a genetic origin. This is more likely to happen when the disease is not hereditary, but is the result of genetic mutations occurring in the gametes of a healthy parent. One example case is the Treacher-Collins syndrome, a condition that affects 1 in every 10,000 births, causing facial deformity and related physiological failures, in particular, potentially life-threatening respiratory problems. So this is what Treacher-Collins syndrome looks like. These are some children and adults that have it. It looks like it affects the nose, the chin, the ears, and I guess the shape of the skull as well. So they're trying to say, well, people who would get this disease would end up being of complete sound mind, but they know that they don't really, they're deformed physically. That's the way it is. The same way as a burn victim would know. A burn victim doesn't become mentally incapacitated through their injury. So this person would essentially have a congenital condition, but that wouldn't affect their brains. Many parents would choose to have an abortion if they find out through genetic prenatal testing that their fetus is affected by TCS. However, genetic prenatal tests for TCS are usually taken only if there is a family history of the disease. Sometimes, though, the disease is caused by a gene mutation that intervenes in the gametes of a healthy member of the couple. Moreover, tests for TCS are quite expensive, and it takes several weeks to get the result. Considering that it is a very rare pathology, we can understand why women are not usually tested for this disorder. So they're going to get into the meat of it pretty soon, but they're starting out talking about basically these people that end up having children with birth defects. So here's the last paragraph of that part. They say, however, such rare and severe pathologies are not the only ones that are likely to remain undetected until delivery. Even more common congenital diseases that women are usually tested for could fail to be detected. An examination of 18 European registries reveals that between 2005 and 2009, only the 64% of Down syndrome cases were diagnosed through prenatal testing. This percentage indicates that, considering only the European areas under examination, about 1,700 infants were born with Down syndrome without parents being aware of it before birth. Once these children are born, there is no choice for the parents but to keep the child which sometimes is exactly what they would have not done if the disease had been diagnosed before birth. So I can speak for my family. I have a cousin who has Down syndrome, and she is, I believe she's older than me, so she's already approaching. I think she's approaching her 40s now. So the way that they're relating to this issue is probably they're essentially negating the right of these people to live because they happen to have genetic disorders. And they're saying, well, most people would, or not even most people, but they're saying the option should be open to eliminate these people for the parents. Okay. Now, this is a pretty touchy subject. I personally, my cousin, I don't really know her especially well, but she doesn't seem that miserable. Her parents do have a kind of a difficult time, especially now that they're elderly. They can't necessarily manage life with these children, but what happens often, and I can't put myself into the play. I have people close to me that deal with this, but I can't put myself into the place of somebody who has a special needs kid. But what usually ends up happening in the best cases is that they end up joining kind of these groups, these parenting groups that they deal with these, and also sending these kids and later adults for activities together. There's kind of there's a community around it, so, sort of like a niche community. The same way that they're and I've never been especially interested in this, but I do know there's a lot of organizations that deal with that, and it's not as if the world suddenly has decided, well, we can't handle people with mental illness, or in this case, mental deficiency or physical deformities. We're going to have to get rid of them. That, I think, would be that's throwing yourself up at your hands up at a problem that people are addressing in other ways. People are addressing those problems in constructive ways. I think it is up to the people to decide whether their children are, whether they have value. But let me rephrase that. If you don't see value in your own children, you have to question why you were trying to have them at all. You have to question who these people are that are having children, and then trying to make an arbitrary decision on whether that person should exist or not. I mean, the same thing could be said about them. It's a chicken and egg argument, okay? I don't like to throw morality directly into a lot of these problems because I know a lot of people have very, very, very different morality skills, like I described at the beginning, between Ricardo and Styx Hexenhammer, whose channel I watch. People have objective morality, and unfortunately, is something that I think we're very far away from. And I don't know what the answer to that is. Now they're getting into the real heart of it. They say euthanasia in infants has been proposed by philosophers for children with severe abnormalities whose lives can be expected to be not worth living and who are experiencing unbearable suffering. Also, medical professionals have recognized the need for guidelines about cases in which death seems to be in the best interest of the child. In the Netherlands, for instance, the Groningen Protocol of 2002 allows to actively terminate the life of infants with a hopeless prognosis who experience what parents and medical experts deem to be unbearable suffering. So that is a difficult position to be in. There's children who are born with severe immune disorders, heart defects, things like that. You can't know what decision you would make unless you've been in that position. Okay, that's why I don't like to throw brimstone on people who end up pulling the plug on kids like this. I mean, it's really think about it. Nobody would want to be in that position. So we have to really kind of look at this from the global level. In some cases, I think these people have a point, but what they're getting at, what they're driving at, I think is really this is a red line that we should never cross, because you'll see what they're talking about. Although it is reasonable to predict that living with this very severe condition is against the best interests of the newborn, it is hard to find definitive arguments to the effect that life with certain pathologies is not worth living, even when those pathologies would constitute acceptable reasons for abortion. It might be maintained that even allowing for the most optimistic assessments of the potential of Down syndrome children, this potential cannot be said to be equal to that of a normal child. So this is a journal. I mean, I'm wondering if the disabled rights community will come after them, because it's going to be a very bitter debate between them. Because on the one hand, you have the pro-abortion crowd fighting against some of these disabled activists are kind of out of whack too. I mean, there wasn't there one of these girls that blinded herself deliberately because she felt ableist guilt. But in fact, people with Down syndrome, as well as people affected by many other severe disabilities, are often reported to be happy. Nonetheless, to bring up such children might be an unbearable burden on the family. This is what they keep going on to. And on society as a whole, when the state economically provides for their care. So now they're taking this decision and they're elevating it. So if you're going to make it about the parents making a decision, I think that there's a way to have a discussion about that. When you start saying society as a whole has no use for these people, well, where is it going to stop? Are you going to go to the mentally ill soon? Because the mentally ill and people with genetic disorders or birth defects those are two separate areas, and not all of the mentally ill are treatable. On these grounds, the fact that a fetus has the potential to become a person who will have an at least acceptable life is no reason for prohibiting abortion. Let me read that again. On these grounds, the fact that a fetus has the potential to become a person who will have an at least acceptable life is no reason for prohibiting abortion. Therefore, we argue that when circumstances occur after birth, such that they would have justified abortion, what we call after-birth abortion should be permissible. In spite of the oxymoron in the expression, we propose to call this practice after-birth abortion rather than infanticide, to emphasize that the moral status of the individual killed is comparable with that of a fetus on which abortions in the traditional sense are performed, rather than to that of a child. Therefore, we claim that killing a newborn would be ethically permissible in all the circumstances where abortion would be. So I don't know where they explain this, because I don't see it yet. I don't see where they explain what's the difference between an afterbirth abortion and an afterbirth fetus and a child, because I personally don't see the difference. Such circumstances include cases where the newborn has the potential to have at least acceptable life, but the well-being of the family is at risk. Accordingly, a second terminological specification is that we call such a practice afterbirth abortion rather than euthanasia, because the best interest of the one who dies is not necessarily the primary criterion for the choice, contrary to what happens in the case of euthanasia. So in a certain sense, this might actually be worse than euthanasia, because they're saying that it's not euthanasia. I believe was the belief that the mentally ill, people who have genetic disorders, they should be killed because all they do is they suffer in life, and they're not capable of really enjoying the world. And in this case, they're saying, well, that's not really the consideration. The consideration is the burdens that they place on their caregivers, parents, and society around them. Failing to bring... So, in thinking about this, I remember a couple of days ago, I was at the supermarket getting my food checked out, and the person who was bagging my groceries was pretty obviously somebody with a mental condition, probably a disabled person. And he seemed happy as could be. He was talking about Uber or something. I was just there getting my groceries back. But he was like talking to the cashier, and I think this is a very dim view of life, if I may say so. Failing to bring a person into existence cannot be compared with the wrong cause by procuring the death of an existing person. The reason is that, unlike the case of an existing person, failing to bring a person into existence does not prevent anyone from accomplishing any of her future aims. However, this consideration entails a much stronger idea that the one according to which severely handicapped children should be euthanized. If the death of a newborn is not wrongful to her on the grounds that she cannot have formed any aim that she is prevented from accomplishing, then it should also be permissible to practice an afterbirth abortion on a healthy newborn too, given that she has not formed any aim yet. There are two reasons which, taken together, justify this claim. The moral status of an infant is equivalent to that of a fetus. That is, neither can be considered a person in a morally relevant sense. I have no idea where they're getting there. I don't understand this. I don't understand what the, they're basically, this is the slippery slope in words. It is not possible to damage a newborn by preventing her from developing the potentiality to become a person in the morally relevant sense. We're going to justify these 2 points in the following 2 sections. The newborn and the fetus are morally equivalent. The moral status of an infant is equivalent to that of the fetus in the sense that both lack the properties that justify the attribution of a right to life to an individual. Both a fetus, I'm shocked reading this stuff. I really can't believe that somebody is saying this. Writing this. Both a fetus and a newborn certainly are human beings and potential persons, but neither is a person in the sense of subject of a moral right to life. We take person to mean an individual who is capable of attributing to her own existence some at least basic value, such that being deprived of this existence represents a loss to her. This means that many non-human animals and mentally retarded human individuals are persons, but that all the individuals who are not in the condition of attributing any value to their own existence are not persons. Merely being human is not in itself a reason for ascribing someone a right to life. Indeed, many humans are not considered subjects of a right to life. Spare embryos where research on embryo stem cells is permitted. Fetuses where so they're feeding basically, they're throwing wood at the fire of people like all those people who complained about stem cell research, about embryos and all of that. Now they can point at this article and say, you see, we were warning at the time that using stem cells would lead to this. Now, I didn't really take a position on that because, in all honesty, it didn't really interest me. But I think this is kind of a this is a red flag here. This is a red flag. There's a red line being crossed. Everything's just red here. Our point here is that although it is hard to exactly determine when a subject starts or ceases to be a person, a necessary condition for a subject to have a right to X is that she is harmed by a decision to deprive her of X. There are many ways in which an individual can be harmed, and not all of them require that she values or is even aware of what she is deprived of. A person might be harmed when someone steals from her the winning lottery ticket, even if she will never find out that her ticket was the winning one. Or a person might be harmed if something were done to her at the stage of fetus which affects for the worse her quality of life as a person, such as her mother took drugs during pregnancy, even if she is not aware of it. However, in such cases, we are talking about a person who is at least in the condition to value the different situation she would have found herself in if she had not been harmed. And such a condition depends on the level of her mental development, which in turn determines whether or not she is a person. Yeah, this is I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I don't see any justification here. So I'm just going to skip to over here. Adoption as an alternative to afterbirth abortion. A possible objection to our argument is that afterbirth abortion should be practiced just on potential people who can never have a life worth living. So now they're going to talk about healthy babies. They're going to say, well, it's also wrong to have people adopted. It says, accordingly, healthy and potentially happy people should be given up for adoption if the family cannot raise them up. Why should we kill a healthy newborn when giving it up for adoption would not breach anyone's right but possibly increase the happiness of people involved, adopters and adoptee? Our reply is the following. We have previously discussed the argument from potentiality, showing that it is not strong enough to outweigh the consideration of the interests of actual people. Indeed, however weak the interests of actual people can be, they will always trump the alleged interest of potential people to become actual ones, because this latter interest amounts to zero. So they're saying this. Basically, a fetus and a newborn, until they actually reach their goal line, until they break the plane of the goal line, if you want to use an English, an American term from football. So once they reach this stage where they can appreciate life, none of this potentiality matters. It's not a touchdown until we raise our hands. They're basically saying. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're basically saying, until this person actually can appreciate the benefit of living, they have no right to life. Whereas the actual people in mind, so they're trying to use this to say, they're not trying to say kids should be aborted. They're trying to say people should have the option, if they can't support a newborn, to be able to kill a newborn baby. Okay, do you understand that they're saying that even if adoption is on the table, you should have the option of killing it. On this perspective, the interests of the actual people involved matter, and among these interests, we also need to consider the interests of the mother, who might suffer psychological distress from giving her child up for adoption. Birth mothers are often reported to experience serious psychological problems due to the inability to elaborate their loss and to cope with their grief. This is ridiculous. If you can't take care of the kid and you want to give it up to adoption, it's a solution. Okay, now people now want to say that the person who would end up living, their interest is negated by the fact that the mother could experience stress or grief over having given up the baby to adoption. I think this is ridiculous. It is true that the grief and sense of loss may accompany both abortion and afterbirth abortion as well as adoption, but we cannot assume that for the birth mother, the latter is the least traumatic. For example, those who grieve a death must accept the reversibility of the loss, but natural mothers often dream that their child will return to them. This makes it difficult to accept the reality of the loss because they can never be quite sure whether or not this is reversible. We are not suggesting that these are definitive reasons against adoption as a valid alternative to afterbirth abortion. Much depends on circumstances and psychological reactions. What we are suggesting is that if interests of actual people should prevail, then afterbirth abortion should be considered a permissible option for women who would be damaged by giving up their newborns for adoption. So there they clarify it. Now for the conclusion, thank God. If criteria such as the costs, social, psychological, and economic for the potential parents are good enough reasons for having an abortion even when the fetus is healthy, if the moral status of the newborn is the same as that of the fetus, and if neither has any moral value by virtue of being a potential person, then the same reasons which justify abortion should also justify the killing of the potential person when it is at the stage of the newborn. Two considerations need to be added. First, we do not put forward any claim about the moment at which afterbirth abortion would no longer be permissible. So they can't even place a time when there's think about it. Hypothetically, you could it could be 2 years later, your kid's like playing in the sandbox, and somebody walks up, they say, hey, you can still off little Tommy or whatever. What? Let me see here. In cases where the afterbirth abortion was requested for not medical reasons, we do not suggest any threshold, as it depends on the neurological development of newborns, which is something neurologists and psychologists would be able to assess. So they're taking the knife and passing it on to somebody else. They're saying, we're giving you the justification. Now you tell us where you're gonna stop. This is. Well, I'm gonna get to my conclusion here. I think. Oh crap! This is a long video, but it's worth it. This is ridiculous. We do not suggest any threshold, as it depends on the neurological development of newborns, which is something neurologists and psychologists would be able to assess. Second, we do not claim that afterbirth abortions are good alternatives to abortion. Abortions at an early stage are the best option for both psychological and physical reasons. However, if a disease has not been detected during the pregnancy, if something went wrong during the delivery, or if economical, social, or psychological circumstances change such that taking care of the offspring becomes an unbearable burden on someone, then people should be given the chance of not being forced to do something they cannot afford. This, I think, is the least ethical paper I've ever seen. If you're talking about medical ethics are about as important as you can get. Because if you can't go into a clinic or any healthcare facility and trust that the staff will, they'll do the best to alleviate your illness as opposed to make it worse or not care at all, then medicine itself is kind of meaningless. Okay, the idea of medicine is to cure illnesses, and in this case, they don't care about the health of the infant at all. They want to philosophize and use semantics in order to argue that in a certain sense, the life of the patient doesn't matter. In a certain sense, the doctors, parents, they should be able to work completely against the interests of the patient. How do we do that? By negating their right to claim the status of a patient. Okay, a newborn child is a patient in a facility. So is a fetus. Okay, that's why you have what do you call it? NICUs. I remember. I think when my first nephew was born, he was in the NICU. Those types of things are serious commitments that doctors, nurses, medical staff make in order to ensure that people trust to bring in their kids, not just bring in their kids, by the way. If these hospitals and other places start to become places, they start to say, well, you can get rid of your kids because of economic reasons or health reasons. Where's it going to stop? Are they going to go and say that about your elderly relatives or something? They'll say, well, if you want your auntie dead, just say the word. Just say the word. Once she's incapacitated. It's ridiculous. I don't think that this is. I think that this might be one of the most disturbing documents in terms of what they're suggesting that I've read in a while. I mean, I'm not trying to say that this is, they put it in very nice couch language, but at the end of the day, they're basically throwing the entire book of medical ethics into the trash and pouring lighter fluid on top of it, as well as what do you call it? Film, picture film, and they're burning it. They're burning it up. It's ridiculous, and I won't abide by it. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share the video. Also follow me on Cocoscope as well as BitChute, and you can find my second channel at Special Cuts, Razor Race Special Cuts. And all the other social media is behind me right here.